and welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns podcast. My name is Tom Luongo, and we've got a lot to talk about. It's Saturday, December 28th, 2019, and I want to follow up on my Christmas Eve podcast. Yes, I'm sorry, we're going to be talking about Star Wars again because, well, hey, it's my podcast. We'll get back to the political stuff on Tuesday, but today I want to rank all the Star Wars films from worst to best because lists are things you do at the end of the year or decade, or in Star Wars case, 4+ decades. And it reminds me that this podcast is brought to you every Tuesday, so you can subscribe to it on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, or any of your other favorite podcast platforms. But before we get to everything else, I want to remind you that you can follow my work over at my blog over at tomluongo.me. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728 live streams. They happen on YouTube every Monday at 8 p.m. and every Friday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Warning, I'm a bad boy with a potty mouth, and I'm not afraid to use it. You can also support verified publishers like me by downloading and installing the Brave browser, where you can get paid in crypto tokens called BAT for voluntarily being served internet advertising as opposed to feeding the Google beast. Brave protects your online privacy while saving you time and bandwidth by blocking all those data snoopers, etc., that are feeding the growing surveillance state. And lastly, you can support me on Patreon over at patreon.com/goldgoatsandguns, where you can sign up for my private market reports, which I publish every Wednesday and Sunday, doing technical analysis and news of the day. And you can also sign up for the Gold Goats and Guns monthly newsletter, designed to wrap up all the geopolitical chaos, global macroeconomics, and shifting cultural trends into a retail, investor-focused portfolio strategy designed to help you make sense of a world going mad. Well, let's get on to the rankings. Now, I'm going to do these from worst to best because that's kind of the way you're supposed to do these. Saving, I guess, the best for last, right? Where's the suspense? Is it going to be Empire? Is it going to be Star Wars? Is it going to be some radical one? Well, we'll find out when we get there. But let's start with the worst one. And be honest with you, the worst movies are going to be the ones that I have the most to talk about because they're the most problematic. It's almost feel like they're the ones you have to justify why you don't like them. So let's start with number 11, and that's Attack of the Clones. And this shouldn't be hard to figure out why. But Attack of the Clones is what happens when George Lucas listens to his outraged fans. Now, if those of you who are alive and remember, but the backlash against The Phantom Menace was really strong. From May of 1999 all the way until May of 2002, the prototypical life that we have today of today's social media, the first iterations of this in comment threads on places like AICN and others, all of fandom at that point was really up in arms about what Lucas didn't achieve with The Phantom Menace, from Jar Jar to just it not being particularly good to the Neimoidians, to whatever people's problems with The Phantom Menace was. And there was a real sense that he was trying to course correct hard with Attack of the Clones, making sure that there was more action, making just sure that the dialogue was better. He even brought in a different screenwriter, Jonathan Hale, to help him. Didn't help. Because at the end of the day, George Lucas, while he was making the prequel films, had around him people who told him yes. They didn't challenge him. They didn't tell him he was wrong. They didn't tell him it wasn't working. Right? He didn't have Marshall Lucas helping him with the edit. He didn't have Carrie Kurtz telling him that he should kill off Han Solo or whatever it was that caused some of the fallouts between the first two movies that were made, which were brilliant, and then the rest of the films that he made, which were not. And I think that at the end of the day, Attack of the Clones suffers from a central problem of, one, Padme was miscast. Natalie Portman is terrible. She's uninterested. She doesn't want to be there. And Hayden Christensen isn't good either. But I think his problem is he's working off of her, and she's terrible, and she's got no chemistry. To me, she's the female Tom Cruise. Neither of them have any sex appeal. They may be attractive people on the surface, but they don't exude anything. And there was no chemistry between them whatsoever. And because of that, the whole thing just falls apart. The action set pieces are lazy and uninspired. And to me, even if you do sit down to watch Attack of the Clones and you're like, okay, I'm going to be into this, and you're trying to watch it from the way that George cut it, you get any kind of momentum going whatsoever. And then we get into the middle of Act 2 when Anakin and Padme go back to Tatooine. And I remember watching this one day and going, God, what did he do? And we finally have the great moment where he's chasing after trying to find his mom, and he gets back to Tatooine. He's trying to find his mom, and this Duel of the Fates is playing, and it's all this stuff, and it's beautiful. All the photography is beautiful, and the imagery is beautiful, and the music is beautiful. And then he cuts away to Obi-Wan because thinks that we needed to be reminded of what was happening with Obi-Wan. There's no artistry here. There's just, oh well, I think we need to have a couple of minutes of Obi-Wan, then we'll get back to the good stuff. And then there's a couple more minutes of Obi-Wan, which isn't important, and then we'll get back to the good stuff. And it's like, no, man, let us at least engage with this story. This is the best part of Anakin's story for the entire movie. Let us engage with it. And you kept walking us away from it. This is terrible. Attack of the Clones is just god-awful. So by the time we get to the third act, I don't care. And I almost wish everybody gets wiped out. And that's a real shame. Number 10, Revenge of the Sith. It's not that Revenge of the Sith is a bad movie, because actually it's not. I watched it recently and it wasn't terrible. But again, without Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen having any chemistry whatsoever, the fundamental conflict in the story is undercut. All the stuff with Palpatine is great. All the stuff with Palpatine and Anakin. I mean, you can see Hayden Christensen is great when he's working off of Ian McDiarmid. But the minute he has to work off of Natalie Portman, or even, sadly, Ewan McGregor, it doesn't work. I think the Anakin Obi-Wan stuff is forced. It doesn't really... The opening action sequence is great, but it's way over the top. I mean, just insanely over the top. Like, we needed to have this enormous action set piece just to prove to everybody that George Lucas knows how to stage one of these things. I was like, but it's not really that good. I mean, it's at least 10 minutes too long or 5 minutes too long. I can just go on and on and on. This is so much about Revenge of the Sith just feels padded in the same way that Return of the Jedi feels padded. And we'll get to that when we talk about Return of the Jedi. Grievous is not a particularly great villain or stand-in villain. Again, I think the prequel films are all like, why would you ever kill off somebody as great as Darth Maul? I mean, Darth Maul is so good, Dave Filoni brings him back from the dead for the Clone Wars. Dooku isn't nearly that good or interesting, neither is Grievous. I was happy when Mace Windu died. I think I actually cheered, because I always hated his character, because he's terrible. And he's a perfect example of how misframed the Phantom Menace is, and how it undercut the rest of the movies, and I'm going to explain that when I get to number 9, The Phantom Menace. Now, this is the best of the prequel films, because this is actually the movie that George Lucas wanted to make. I don't feel that that the tone of Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith is pure. I think that George is floundering as a filmmaker. He doesn't know his audience and understand his audience. He's trying to make them happy, but he doesn't get it. And in his own kind of aspy way, he's trying to make it work, and he can't. And he doesn't have the people around him telling him what he needs to hear, which is, this isn't good enough, do better. So no movie is closer to George's heart than The Phantom Menace. He makes a perfectly functional movie with his tone and his thing, and he's playing jazz, as he says. The documentary on the DVD says, not all these movies work, and I'm just playing jazz here. I'm like, dude, you can't play jazz with a $120 million Star Wars movie and say, well, I want to play artist here, starving artist, and we'll have like all these different storylines, and we won't have any of them have any more meaning than the other one. We'll just have them all intercut next to each other, and then we'll have a jumble and a mess, and it won't make any sense. And you can't do that in this kind of movie making. Star Wars does not get the Terrence Malick treatment. It just doesn't work. Okay? And frankly, George Lucas is not that talented a filmmaker to make that work, because The Phantom Menace proved this. He should have structured the screenplay around one of the conflicts. Qui-Gon and his fight with the Jedi Council, which would have been my choice. Padme trying to take back her planet. Anakin struggling with his abandonment and his leaving his mom. One of those three stories. And really, there's a fourth. There's also Jar Jar trying to bring the Gungans in from the cold and reconcile with the humans on Naboo. There's 4 conflicts in The Phantom Menace. There's 4 major story arcs. And they all get equal weight and equal time, and none of them get treated well enough. And that's the problem with The Phantom Menace. Had he structured around one thing, Jar Jar would have been acceptable comic relief, especially when his part was cut in half. And there would have been all that stuff. I think that Qui-Gon should have taken center stage. Liam Neeson's the best actor of the bunch. His story as John the Baptist searching for the chosen one makes the most sense. You hang all the other conflicts off of it, and you have his fight with the Jedi Council be framed around them being dominated by adherents of the active force, and Qui-Gon being the advocate of the living force. And those two factions can meet and fight over what to do with Anakin. It seems very obvious to me, and it's a shame. As a final coda to all the prequel films, I want to say this. All of them would be better served if they are recut where all the dialogue is taken out, and when they were just left with the images and John Williams music. Recut them as 1920s era silent films in color, and they're much more compelling movies. But the minute Natalie Portman opens her mouth, forget it. The movies just stop. Dead cold. Number 8, Return of the Jedi. And the reason Return of the Jedi is number 8 and not higher in the list is because it's only 1/3 of the movie. At the end of the day, Return of the Jedi is 1 good act and 2 acts worth of empty spectacle. Han Solo's rescue from Jabba the Hutt has no stakes whatsoever, because we don't have any reason for Han to be necessary at the end, because anybody could have done what Han Solo did in Act 3 of the Empire of Return of the Jedi. Anybody, we could have introduced an entirely new character to go and be, Mr. Gorilla Badass and get it done. The fact that Han Solo is turned into comic relief and a buffoon, and literally a buffoon in Return of the Jedi, is offensive. Leia as window dressing, hot window dressing, but window dressing nonetheless, doesn't help matters either. It's a real step down in terms of the complexity and framing and shot selection and editing and everything from The Empire Strikes Back and Star Wars to Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi it reminds me of like Conquest of the Planet of the Apes in terms of its subtlety. Until we get to the third act, Vader, Palpatine, Luke show, then it's really good. And there are moments in earlier portions of the movie that you can pull forward. But honestly, you could do away with more than half of Return of the Jedi and make it a short film, and it would be great. Because that's all that's really necessary. The rest of it is just window dressing. And is, for the most part, empty spectacle without stakes. It's good. It's fun. It's not that interesting. Speaking of mostly empty spectacle, number 7, Solo, a Star Wars story, which should have been renamed Chewie, a Star Wars story. And the fact that it did so poorly at the box office makes me wistful for the fact that we're not going to see any more Han and Chewie movies, because these are really good. I don't care that they don't have a whole lot of mythological stake or anything along those lines. I'm good with that. Star Wars doesn't always have to be larger than life. The next Star Wars movie being, another chapter in a modern Bible. I don't need it to be that all the time. I can just tell some simple little stories that fill in the backstory of some of my favorite characters and give me 2 hours and 15 minutes of entertainment at the movies. For that reason, Solo was this far down on the list. As a film, it's actually really quite competent. It's more than competent. It's actually really quite good. It's just not deep. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the rest of Star Wars is. And therefore, it's number 7 on the list. It's a solid action film. Doesn't really have much in the way of stakes. I mean, I can go through and point out the little mythological moments and the callbacks to the great archetypes and all that in the movie. And they'll all be there. But it's not really designed that way. Okay? It's got great characters. It's got good pace. It even tries for some depth, but it's not really there. It's disarming fun. And as I said, it's a shame we won't ever see a follow-up to it, because I think it's an excellent template for what you can do in the Star Wars universe. Number 6, J.J. Abrams' The Force Awakens. I think The Force Awakens is a solid, charming reintroduction to Star Wars after the bitter aftertaste of the prequel films. In 2015, Star Wars fandom was in serious trouble. We were all worried as to whether or not Disney was going to, destroy Star Wars. But after Lucas gave us the uninspired prequel films, J.J. Abrams was coming off of Star Trek Into Darkness, where he ticked off the fan base there for the updating Wrath of Khan. I thought it was fun. It didn't bother me at all. But I don't take Star Trek all that seriously, and I certainly don't take Star Trek mythology seriously. So I was looking forward to The Force Awakens, but with my fingers crossed. And it took me a couple of times to really enjoy it. And I enjoyed it, but it took me a little while to get over that trepidation and just kind of sit and relax and go, okay, this is a fun movie. There's a couple of things about it that don't hold together on repeated viewings. I think it's a charming enough, and I think that The Force Awakens is one of those movies, like Solo, that you can see all these little details of characterization and that really elevate the material. The material is good, but I think it's elevated by the little nuances and performances by Harrison Ford and Daisy Ridley and Johnny Boyega and, to a lesser extent, Oscar Isaac and the rest of them. I think they're all very, very good in the movie, and therefore, and that's a testament to the direction. That's a testament to the director J.J. Abrams and the script itself and all that those things are there. But at the same time, it's very obvious that the script for The Force Awakens was in a state of flux even while they were filming it, because when you actually pick the movie apart, it's very obvious that there are references that don't quite make sense. There are plot threads that don't hang together. There are references to characters like the Knights of Ren, which never make any sense. And there's all this stuff that are set up but aren't paid off, or just left dangling, or there's questions that are never answered. How did Maz Kanata get Luke's lightsaber, which we still never get an answer to. There's little things that were supposed to be in the final cut of the movie, and J.J. Abrams cut out to keep us on the edge of our seats so we wouldn't ask these questions. It's a similar thing he does in Rise of Skywalker, but at least there the script is much more coherent. Last thing is that, in wanting to make an homage to the original film so badly, the one that inspired him so much, I think they make the terrible mistake of going for a third Death Star. And it reminds me of Batman Begins, right? The Starkiller base and the stupid microwave water weapon from Batman Begins are both two of the dumbest MacGuffins of all time in terms of what they do to undercut the power of the story, the character story that's happening around us. Because all the arc plot in The Force Awakens is irrelevant to me. It's the characters. It's how the characters are moving from scene to scene, how they interact with each other, how they're growing and changing and morphing, and how these events are affecting them. It's not the events themselves that are important. It's the effect on the people that make the story. That's what we care about. The rest of it is insane, right? I'd like those things to all work and hang together. That would be great, but they don't. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, sometimes when telling these kinds of stories, you almost don't want them to work that way. You want people to argue about them, because then you know they're sticking and they keep you engaged with the material at both a conscious and unconscious level, more so than you would have if everything kind of fit neatly into a coherent whole. But I think Starkiller Base, like the microwave weapon from Batman Begins, are both such a distraction because they're so unbelievably stupid that they actually rob a little bit of the dramatic weight of both of the stories. Certainly the whole evil dad, good dad, evil dad thing that was going on in Batman Begins, which was brilliant. And like this, the microwave weapon is just bomb. And it really hurts the Batman Begins as a movie. And I think it also hurts The Force Awakens with Starkiller Base. And that's why it's number 6 as opposed to number 5, which I think is Rise of Skywalker. And this is probably a little high, maybe a little low. I'm not sure where to put Rise of Skywalker. I've seen it twice. I haven't seen it a third time yet. I do want to watch it a third time, but I think that it works best as it's certainly not the best of the sequel films. I think that's by far The Last Jedi. And I think there's a big jump between these bottom 7 and the top 4. I think the top 4 are superlative movies. I think these are all, the rest of them underneath them are either good. The ones in the middle are good movies, and the ones on the bottom are just not good movies. The Rise of Skywalker is good. I don't know that it's great. It's a solid payoff of the sequel trilogy. It's weighed down with unbelievable amounts of baggage, and it's almost was an impossible movie to make. And what they did well. I think it's a beautiful meditation on identity, deciding on what kind of person you want to be, and how to become, and a path to become self-actualized. I think that in and of itself is all that's really important about it. It gets that right, and it gets that so right in the characters of Ben Solo, Rey, and even to a lesser extent, Poe and Finn, that's good enough. Surprisingly deep film in terms of its structure and in terms of its message. Pleased about that. But like The Force Awakens, I don't think J.J. Abrams trusts his own material. And I really want to find his agent's number and send him a copy of Billy Joel's Vienna, for Christ's sake. Slow down, you crazy child. He really needs to trust his material more. But I think the Rise of Skywalker, the payoff for Ben Solo, makes him one of the best villains of all time. And I think it's important that the reason for that is not because we don't see him like we see Darth Vader at the end of his life. We see Ben like Anakin. We see Ben kind of at the moment where Anakin turns to the dark side. Ben is not competent. He's insane. We see him as he pulls himself out of the depths of despair, that he becomes a much more competent character, much more self-possessed. We meet Vader. Vader is self-possessed. He's a force of nature. And then who slowly becomes unglued. Prequel films bring us, the picture of the young Anakin and how he falls. He becomes effectively where Kylo Ren starts The Force Awakens. I think it's very interesting. I think Ben is a great, great character. I think we'll come to appreciate just how good he is, because it's the kind of villain that is really hard, not just to pull off, but to have any sympathy for. The spoiled brat, the unbounded child. It's a very difficult character to humanize, especially for young men. They don't like to see that reflected in themselves. And since these movies are ultimately young adult fiction, that's hard for a lot of young men, even middle-aged men, or overgrown children. And at the same time, Rey is a great heroine. She's got a great Beauty and the Beast arc that's both internal and external. Number 4 is Rogue One, a Star Wars story. I think Rogue One is everything that we, as older Star Wars fans, want in Star Wars films. This is the kind of movie we want Star Wars to grow into for us. But we don't want them to be just kids' films anymore. We want them to be edgier and darker and grittier, and we want that. We crave more of that. As you can see it in the response that people have to The Mandalorian as well. That's what original trilogy fans wanted. It was Star Wars introduced the idea of the used universe in science fiction. Previous to that, science fiction was always shiny and new and wow and all chrome. And then Star Wars, everything would run down and like it had been lived in forever. Rogue One reminds us of all that. It's also equal parts redemption story and nostalgia fest, and that doesn't hurt anything either. Seeing Rogue One for the first time, and the great shot of the Y-wings coming in for a bombing run in full flight We finally see a whole full wing of Y-Wings come in and bomb the gate, the gate for the shield gate over Scarif. And I just teared right up. I was like, oh my God, it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And when Red Leader showed up for the first time, it was one of my favorite characters in all of Star Wars. Yeah, man, it got me. But I've watched Rogue One a number of times since then, and the movie still works fundamentally. It has the same problems that Force Awakens has. It's obvious that there was extensive reshoots that play with tone, and I think Tony Gilroy did a fine job of recutting the movie and salvaging it somehow. But it's obvious that there's definitely a bit of a patchwork tonally. That's okay. The movie still works really well. I think it's impeccably well cast. And while a lot of critics think that the characters are thinly drawn, I would say no. It's a classic example of characterization on the fly that you get by just watching great actors work within the context of a good script and know exactly how to bring as much character to the screen as is necessary for the amount of screen time that they have. And if you don't think that, go watch every scene with Baze and Sheridan. Baze Malbus and Sheridan White. They are brilliant in every way. Every scene is just, and if there's one more moment of Donnie Yen in that movie, it would be too much. Because he would just take the movie over. And he would take it away from Jyn Erso. And Jyn Erso is, she's Jyn Erso. She's fantastic. And I love watching all of these. I love watching Rogue One this way because it's definitely fallen people fighting to maintain a fallen mythology in a failing society against impossible odds. That is not what we see in any other Star Wars movie. And I think that makes it really resonant. Number 3 is The Last Jedi. And honestly, The Last Jedi could wind up much higher than this in the end. I think Rian Johnson's Last Jedi is the movie that redeems Star Wars as a series and as an IP and as a mythology. I think without The Last Jedi, Star Wars is very thin. I think it's playing at being mythology while not actually being mythology. You have to do what Rian Johnson did in The Last Jedi to elevate Luke and Han and Vader and all these original series characters to the next level. You have to take their stories into the future and finish the heroic cycle with them. He does that, and he does it beautifully, and he does it brilliantly. Does he overdo it at some times? Sure. Is the whole Canto Bight sequence a little too long? Absolutely. Is the movie a little overstuffed? Of course. Whatever. So what? Get over yourself. It's 2 hours and 31 minutes long. If you don't like 9 minutes of it, it's still better than, it's still longer. It's still a more great movie than every other Star Wars movie. Because the next longest one is Rise of Skywalker. And I can take if you want to take 9 minutes out of The Last Jedi, fine. It's still better than everything else. The themes are beautiful. It is the series Unforgiven. They give Luke the Jesus Orc, for Christ's sake. It's, you can't ask for much more than that. Rey has the beginnings of her Beauty and the Beast arc, which is a classic female archetype. All of these films are now purely in the camp of traditional gender roles and traditional mythological archetypes with The Last Jedi. Up until that point, not necessarily true. Until we have Rey tested the way she is. This is a meditation on violence and the cost of war. This is a meditation on all the right things that we should be talking about today and for the next 20 years and for the next 200 years. The Last Jedi is one of the most beautiful movies I've ever seen. Number 2 is The Empire Strikes Back. And this should be no surprise to anybody who knows me well. I love The Empire Strikes Back. I think it's a brilliant movie. I think it's got little moments in it that don't make any sense, but I overlook them. It is the greatest reversal in film history. Luke, I am your father. I'm sorry. No, I am your father. Is the greatest single reversal in film history. So in structuralist terms, conflicts, scenes end with some kind of reversal, where a reversal of value from hope to despair, from despair to hope, from positive to negative, from negative to positive. That's the whole point of a scene, certainly in Western filmmaking, is that values have to reverse themselves. And then within scene arcs, small sets of scenes that happen within an act of a movie, there's a bigger reversal that happens over the course of, say, 3 or 4 scenes to reverse that value, which then fits into the context of the arc. And there's a big reversal at the end of an arc. And then there's a big reversal at the end of each arc. And then there's a reversal at the end of the 3rd act of the movie. Generally, if it's a 3-act movie. Adventure films can be up to 7 or 9 acts, for Christ's sake, where the final reversal is immense and is the climax and should be the climax of the movie. The climax of The Empire Strikes Back is finding out that Darth Vader is Luke's father, which is the now biggest reversal over 2 films and sets up a massive potential reversal of the 3rd film. It also is the first what I like to call Fight Club moment in a movie. That's a moment where all of a sudden the movie you thought you were watching is not the movie you actually have been watching. No, I Am Your Father is that kind of moment. It's like that moment in Fight Club when the narrator realizes that he's Tyler Durden. Or Bruce Willis figures out that he's a ghost at the end of The Sixth Sense. These kinds of reversals that occur so that all of a sudden now you have to review the text of the movie that you've watched to this point and go, that's not the movie I thought I was watching. And The Empire Strikes Back is one of the first big budget movies, big important movies to do that thing. Fight Club owes its life to Star Wars. So does The Sixth Sense. So do so many other movies with the big twist at the end. M. Night Shyamalan's whole career is that series of Darth Vader moments. It solidifies Darth Vader as the best villain ever. It's a disturbing look at adolescence. The Empire Strikes Back dares to be a second act in a play. Everything's going to suck. There's so many audacious things about The Empire Strikes Back. I'm not going to say anything more new about it that you haven't heard before. That makes it great. Doesn't make it better than Star Wars. Star Wars is where it all starts. It's where it all ends. If no other film came after Star Wars, we would be okay. We don't need The Empire Strikes Back to make Star Wars great. That we get The Empire Strikes Back makes Star Wars even better. And I really do refuse to call it A New Hope. To me, it is still Star Wars. And then there's the Star Wars Saga or whatever. And then there's Star Wars, capital S, capital W, or capital Star, capital Wars. And then there's Star Wars, the movie. And you kind of say them differently. It stands above all the other films because it can stand on its own as its own movie. It has the greatest third act in a movie ever. Period. There is no better third act than The Battle of Yavin. It is its own movie within a movie. It's the first movie I ever saw, I think I'll ever see, where the third act introduces an entirely new set of rules about how to watch the movie, set in the context of this universe. All of a sudden, we're now in a dogfight. How do these ships work? Who are all these new characters? What's going on here? The only movie that comes close to having a third act as fascinating and as much of a jerk to the right as Star Wars is The Matrix. Guns, lots of guns. We were just talking about this before I sat down to record with my wife. I said, look, she said, yeah. I said, yeah, but do you understand that there's a reason why that line is there? Because now we have to figure out how, we have to understand, and the movie doesn't tell us why we need guns. We just know that we need guns to do what? To kill all the agents, to clear them from the room so that they can come in and get Morpheus while the agents have been shunted to a different part of the building and then have to run back into the room. It's just logistics, but the movie doesn't tell you that. And it's kind of the same thing with Star Wars. All of a sudden, Star Wars, the Battle of Yavin, it's a different set of rules. We don't know anything about Darth Vader. All of a sudden, Darth Vader's this badass. It's like all of a sudden there's these new characters. There's objectives to be completed. There's this trench run. There's all of these new rules. How they're going to attack the Death Star. They just said they're going to do it. We don't know how they're going to go do it. We don't know how they're organized or what they're going to do or what, we don't know anything. And then Lucas teaches us all that on the fly in perfect timing. When Red Leader says, I copy Gold Leader, I'm going to cut across their axis and try and draw their fire. And then John Williams' score starts back up again, and the thing is one big ride. I have watched the Battle of Yavin 400 times. I'll go downstairs when I'm done with this, and I'll just put it on and just watch it. Because it's 25 minutes of the most amazing filmmaking ever. Or however long it is. I don't even know how long it is. I don't care. It just starts, and then I have to go until the movie's over. You're not allowed to stop me while I'm watching the Battle of Yavin. Are you kidding me? The house could be on fire. Wait. Luke's still going down the trench. That's how brilliant it is. The tension is ratcheted to the roof. There's nothing quite like what we saw in that movie when it came out. And it's still that good today. This has been the Gold Goats and Guns podcast for Saturday, December 28th, 2019. If you like what you heard today, please give a like and subscribe and all that stuff that you're supposed to do. I enjoy doing this kind of stuff as much as I enjoy doing all the politics. You know how much I care about this stuff, and I think movies and storytelling and culture are incredibly important, especially in these dark and tumultuous times. So, hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk to you guys on Tuesday. Be well and keep your cigar on.